Economics is something that impacts all of our lives. Look at the recent supply chain bottlenecks, surging inflation, and increases in demand which are driving up the prices of assets like GameStop stock and Bitcoin. Economics is able to explain all of these, but unfortunately, many of us are just not taught about this fundamental subject. If you make sure to watch it all the way through to the end, this video will explain how economics works. It'll basically be like an intro to macroeconomics 101 freshman crash course. If that sounds good, make sure to crash your mouse into that like button and then click it so that this video can get increased demand in the YouTube algorithm. That's a pun we'll talk more about soon. While you're down there, please also subscribe and ring the bell if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out every Friday. They'll help you live a life you love through personal finance, investing, and self-improvement. Hi, I'm Evan, and let's talk about what economics even is. Economics is the social science that studies how individuals, firms, groups, governments, and entire societies deal with the problem of scarcity. If you're thinking, Evan, that sounds like it came out of a textbook. Well, it probably did. I'm going off of notes from my actual freshman macroeconomics class. The next question you probably have is, what the heck is scarcity? It is the inability to satisfy all wants, needs, and desires. Or more simply, it's a word for rarity. Gold is valuable because it is scarce, or because it is rare. Now, rarity doesn't necessarily actually mean anything though. I've only made one video about health savings accounts, but that doesn't make it desirable. Scarcity requires people to want, need, or demand something. Now, when we talk about economics, there are a few assumptions that we have to make about how the world works in order for us to construct theories and do math with the same set of rules. These assumptions are called economic reasoning. The first of these is the assumption of the rational agent. This means that we assume agents, a fancy word for people who make decisions, seek to maximize their happiness or benefit and minimize their suffering or cost. The other two assumptions are that we can measure these benefits and costs. We measure benefit by utility, or these theoretical things called utils, which represent units of happiness. Practically, benefits can also be measured by dollars, revenues, profits, etc. Similarly, costs are normally going to be measured practically, like with dollars in accounting profit. There's also opportunity cost, which is the foregone benefit of the next best alternative. This means that when you choose to do something, you're also choosing not to do something else. Opportunity cost is the value of this something else. Now, when we talk about measuring benefits and costs, we're also measuring their changes. There's total change, which is the jump from point A to point B. And more importantly, we have marginal change. This is the increase or decrease in economic benefit from a 1 unit change in economic activity. And that takes us to the law of diminishing return. This says that the more of something that you have, the less benefit or happiness that you receive from getting more of it. Basically, as you get more supply, your demand is going to go down for it. We'll touch more on that later. The factors that influence supply and demand are called incentives. These include things like consumer preferences and changes in production, which we'll also cover later. Supply and demand are the basis of economics. We construct them through the 3 economic questions: what, how, and for whom. What is involved in economics? Primarily, it's the sale of different types of goods and services. There's consumption for things that benefit you directly, like food and cars; capital, with a K, for stuff used to make other things; government, for goods and services purchased by the government; and export, for stuff sold outside of the country. How is this stuff made? With the 4 factors of production. First, you need labor. Then there's capital, again with a K, which includes machinery and raw materials, and also human capital like skills and knowledge. Then there's land, and finally entrepreneurship. This is the use of management, leadership, or ideas. You can measure the scale or the size of these factors with a couple more vocab terms. You pay wages for labor, interest on capital, rent on land, and make profits with entrepreneurship. And finally, with the economic questions, we have, who is this stuff for? This is answered with the circular flow model. It's a chart that basically says you get money from businesses by providing factors of production to them, like labor, and then you use this money to buy stuff from other businesses, who then use that money to buy more factors of production, which are used to make more stuff, and then the cycle goes on and on and on. The exchange of these goods and services happens on the market, and this means that we can finally draw a graph. The market consists of supply from producers and demand from consumers. Most of macroeconomics boils down to variations on this graph. The axes on the supply and demand graph are price and quantity. That's the amount that stuff sells for and how much of it's sold. There's a few assumptions we have to make in order to use this model. The first is that everything will be held equal, meaning stuff won't change except for the price and quantity. Let's focus on the demand curve. It's made up of a group of consumers who enter the market with a demand schedule. That's a list of quantity demanded points. This basically just means that if a slice of pizza costs a penny, you'll likely buy a lot of them. But if a slice costs $1,000, you're likely not going to buy any. Demand schedules plot the relationship between how many of a thing people want to buy, or the quantity demanded, and at what price they're willing to do so. More specifically, quantity demanded is the amount of a good or a service that a consumer is willing to buy given a specific price. The next assumption we have to make is that people have a perfect understanding of their own value for goods and services. While this is not true in reality, it is necessary for simplicity. Finally, with the demand curve, we have the law of demand. As you can see with the curve, as prices go up, quantity demanded demanded decreases. As prices go down, quantity demanded increases. Flipping over to the supply curve, it's all the same as the demand stuff, but from the point of view of a group of suppliers. They enter the market with a supply schedule and have quantity supplied points as to how many goods or services they are willing to sell at a specific price point. Similarly, we make an assumption that producers have a perfect understanding of the value of their goods and services. Finally, we have the law of supply. As prices increase, quantity supplied will also increase. As prices decrease, quantity supplied will also decrease. Let's redraw the supply and demand curves. The spot where they intersect or meet in the middle is called the equilibrium point. This is the ideal place for the market to be, since demand will be met by available supply at a mutually beneficial price point. If the quantity demanded is lower than the quantity supplied, this is called a surplus. If the reverse is true and the quantity demanded is higher than the quantity supplied, then this is called a shortage. The father of economics, Adam Smith, proposed that the invisible hand, or natural market forces, balance supply and demand back to equilibrium. He also made the Smithian assumption that acting out of self-interest benefits everyone in society. So what are some of the forces that will shift the demand and the supply curve? These are the 5 factors of demand and the 5 factors of supply. Starting on the demand side, we have the cost of related goods and services. These include both substitutes and complements. A substitute is a good or a service which can easily replace another, like switching soda brands. For example, if the price of Pepsi decreases, then the demand for Coke decreases. This is because Pepsi is a cheaper alternative. It lowers Coke's equilibrium price and quantity supply. The reverse is also true. So if the price for Pepsi increases, then the demand for Coke increases. This will raise its equilibrium price and quantity supply. Complements are goods and services which are typically purchased together, like milk and cereal. If the price of cereal increases, then the demand for milk will decrease. That will lower its equilibrium price and quantity supply. The opposite is true as well for a decrease in the price of cereal. The next factor of demand is the number of consumers. As the number of consumers increases, demand will also increase. As the number of consumers decreases, demand will also decrease. Pretty straightforward. Next up, we have income. The effect of income changes on demand depends on what type of good or service that we're looking at. There's 3 categories: normal, luxury, and inferior goods. Normal goods are things that we have to purchase all of the time. Luxury goods are things that we buy when we have extra money, like designer clothes or a nice watch. Inferior goods are things that we tend to buy when we have less money, like getting ramen noodles instead of your regular pasta. For both luxury and normal goods, demand will change the same way as your income does. As your income increases, demand increases for luxury and normal goods. Of course, demand goes down if your income decreases. Inferior goods work in the opposite way. As your income decreases, your demand for inferior goods actually increases. As you make more money, you don't have to buy them as often, so your demand decreases. Next up, we have expected prices. This is how we react to what we think prices are going to be like in the future. So if we think prices will rise in the future, then demand will increase today so we can buy stuff at a cheaper price. If we think prices will go down in the future, like with an upcoming sale, then demand will decrease today since we can buy it cheaper in the future. Price expectations are heavily tied into our reactions to inflation, but that's a story for another video. The last factor of demand is preferences. These are trends, fads, and changes in popular culture that affect demand. When fidget spinners were all the rage, demand for them went up. Now that we don't care about them, the demand for them has decreased. Now let's look at the 5 factors of supply. These are the forces that will shift the supply curve either left or right in our supply and demand view of the market. First, there is the rise of the cost of productive resources. A productive resource is something that is used as the input in making something else. These include the things we mentioned earlier, like labor, land, capital, and entrepreneurship, although it's likely easier to think about it as turning raw materials into a finished good. If the price of productive resources increases, then supply will decrease. This is because it will cost producers more to make stuff. This will in turn increase prices while lowering the quantity supplied. But if the price of productive resources declines, supply will increase, which will lower prices and raise the quantity supplied. Next up, we have the number of producers. This is the straightforward one. If there's more producers, there's also more supply. If the amount of producers decreases, then supply will also decrease. Then we have technology. Technological improvements make for advances in productivity, which will in turn increase supply. Although never really seen in practice, a reversion in technology will lead to a decrease in supply. A practical example would be removing technology due to safety concerns, but this is more so something at the microeconomic scale rather than at the macroeconomic. Then we have government taxes and subsidies. First, there's excise taxes, which are additional taxes on certain products and services. These raise the cost of production and distribution. Examples include taxes on tobacco and gambling. So if excise taxes increase, supply will go down since they raise costs. If excise taxes decrease, then the supply will increase since it's cheaper to make stuff. Second, we have subsidies. These are things like government grants, loans, and bailouts. This extra money has to go somewhere, like producing stuff. So when subsidies increase, so does supply. And as subsidies subside, then supply will decrease. And finally, of the factors of supply, we have common resources. We'll have to first distinguish between rivalrous and non-rivalrous resources. Try saying that one 5 times fast. Rivalrous goods are those where if you make one, one, then you can't make the other. They are mutually exclusive. If you're a chicken farmer, you can collect eggs, but then you can't harvest the chickens for poultry. Or you can get the chicken meat and then have no chickens to lay eggs. So if the price of eggs increases, the supply of chicken meat will decrease because suppliers are now incentivized to make more chicken eggs since their price is higher rather than its rivalrous chicken meat. And if the price of eggs decreases, then the supply of chicken meat will increase since its price is now relatively higher compared to eggs. So then there's non-rivalrous goods, and those are the ones that can be produced not mutually exclusively. If you're a cattle farmer, then you can produce both beef and leather from the same cow. If the price of leather increases, then the supply of beef will also increase. Production will increase to sell more leather at a higher price point, and therefore more beef will also be made since it's a non-rivalrous good. Reversely, if the price of leather decreases, so too will the supply of beef as production ramps down. Now with that, make sure to increase that like button by moving your invisible hand over to it and then clicking it if you enjoyed this video or learned something interesting in order to ramp up its value in the YouTube algorithm. Do you want me to make a video covering more intro to macroeconomics topics? Should I do one about microeconomics? What can I do to make these videos better for you? Let me know and comment down below. Then click that video on screen to watch another that you're going to enjoy, and then please add some music, an increase in your economics knowledge, or whatever else it is that you love to your day.